everyone, and welcome to Women in Leadership panel with Women's Work in Progress. My name is Gretchen Pearson, and we would like to extend a warm welcome and thank you for taking the time to join us. As we get started, please feel free to introduce yourself in the chat. We're excited that you're here, and we hope to have the chance to get to know you in the future as we continue to build this community. We recently started Women's Work in Progress, and this is our fourth virtual event. For those of you who are new to us, we are a networking community collective of women supporting, learning, and connecting with each other as we redefine our careers in a world forever changed by the pandemic. As we emerge from the COVID-19 pandemic, we are very aware of its immense impact on women especially. So whether you are just starting out, transitioning into something new, creating something of your own, or ready to lead the way for others, we are creating a community to link us all together. So that's exactly what the women on this panel have generously agreed to do for the next hour. So here's what the event will look like today. I'll give a quick introduction on each of the panelists, and then we'll dig right in with them. If you have any questions for them, please feel free to put in the chat, and we'll get to as many of the questions at the end as we can. So I'm going to start with Molly Snyder. Full transparency, she's my sister, and she really helped put together this awesome panel for us. Molly is also the Chief Communications Officer for Shipt, where she oversees the company's media relations, internal communications, public policy, and government affairs. So hi, Molly. We have Stacy Janicki, who is Senior Partner and Director of Account Management for Carmichael Lynch. She has over 25 years experience in the advertising industry. Hi, Stacy. We also have Jackie Rice, who is General Counsel for the furniture company Herman Miller. She has over 20 years experience managing global complex legal matters for Fortune 50 companies. Next, Heather Teskey, who is Chief Marketing Officer for Deluxe. She has over 20 years experience across all aspects of marketing and has become known for her ability to span vision, strategy, and execution. Hi, Heather. And last but not least, we have Tina Morgan, who is Chief Philanthropy Officer at Make-A-Wish, Central New York. She's a strong community and social services professional, skilled in nonprofit organizations, event management, fundraising, and volunteer management. So hi, Tina. Do any of you have anything you'd like to add? Did I miss anything? All right. I'm going to turn it over to Elisa. She's a fellow founder of Women's Work in Progress, and she will be moderating today's panel.
Thanks, Gretchen. Like Gretchen said, we are so grateful that you are all here, and we're really excited for this conversation. And everyone who's here in this meeting, please put your questions in the chat as we go on. I will continue to remind you of that, so we'll hopefully have some time for that at the end. The first question we wanted to dive in with is a question that we ask our members every Wednesday, because on our Instagram account, we will highlight a different member and ask, how has the pandemic impacted your career? And so in that same spirit, what has been the impact on the pandemic on your professional life? And that might be negative, it might be positive, but we'd love to hear from each of you. I would like to start with Tina, since she's right there next to me on my screen. So.
I promise I will try not to have anyone go, you're on mute. That's been the biggest impact. Just kidding. In all seriousness, I was actually recruited away to Make-A-Wish 2 months before the pandemic started. So I began a new job, and then we immediately went remote. So it was very challenging trying to get to know my new team and figure out all the ins and outs of a new company. Central New York is part of the national organization, and it was really challenging to do that remotely. So I think that's been the biggest impact. I've always had the ability, fortunately, to work remote in my jobs, which has been nice when needed, but there is something to be said for developing relationships in person. So I think in a new job, that was the greatest challenge, and figuring out how to motivate the team that I really hadn't connected with yet.
Wow, just the basic reality for all of us that our relationships were changed, limited, went virtual, which was not easy. So how about you, Heather?
There we go. Hi, everyone. You know, when I look at it, I feel like there was like this clashing of my personal life, my nonprofit life, and my work life. And it all came together sort of at the dining room table. And so there were a couple things I had to do. I had to make choices of where I was going to focus my time, because there was a definite need with my family and my kids, and a definite need with my career as we were taking it all home. And so I I paused on some of the nonprofit board work that I was doing and just allowing myself to be able to take care of myself mentally, physically, emotionally, and also be able to serve in the role that I had. I found actually my team, we became really close. So there was this gift in COVID that we just got into a cadence of meeting every morning, sort of think of a stand up, and we connected in ways because we were all home. So we were learning more about each other. The drawback or the challenge was really more with my executives. I was so used to being in the office and doing so much in the hallway, and all of a sudden I didn't have hallways to lean on. And so trying to find a way to communicate with them, engage with them, and make sure that we were on the same page was probably where it was a little bit more challenging and took me a longer time to figure out sort of the nuances of that.
Molly, do you want to share with us how the pandemic impacted you?
Sorry, you were on mute. I was trying to read lips. Sure.
Oh, my fault. So sorry.
No worries. So, I mean, in great ways and in really hard ways, you know, I similar to Tina, I actually switched jobs about 2 months into the pandemic and joined Shipt as a same day delivery service. So obviously it was a business that was going like this. And I stepped into a new role. So, you know, both the, you know, what Heather and Tina have mentioned were very much the reality. I had no hallway chats. I was joining the leadership team of the company without knowing anyone other than the CEO. And so all of those connections just took so much longer. And so one of the things I've learned has been that I needed to give myself a lot of grace, that timelines look different, relationship building looks different, and that you just can't hold it up to the same bar because it's a totally different world. You know, and I would share certainly, Heather, the challenges of leading a team that I was new to, that was new to me, not knowing the culture, like those were all incredibly hard things. I knew they would be, but they were harder than I thought. But I also say, like, I use the phrase dark silver linings a lot. They might not have been clouds that we asked for, but I've learned a lot through it. And it's really pushed me and my leadership in ways that I never expected.
Wow, that's so good. It's so great to hear that we're not all the only ones who've been through such a hard time this year. And also just thinking about the idea of being a leader and not being able to really interact with the people you're leading. It's already hard enough, especially when you're starting something new, right? To gain that trust. So it's really interesting to hear. How about you, Jackie?
Hey, everybody. Thanks, Elisa. I'll start with the not so fun part. And then there actually was a huge silver lining in COVID for me that I'll talk a little bit about. But first, I had actually been in my role for about a year when COVID hit. But as a new general counsel, my learning curve was also like this. Plus, it was a new industry. So the not so great part of COVID, exactly what my co-panelists have mentioned, really difficult to connect with your team at times. Although I think we've figured it out, and like Heather, we're kind of closer than ever at the moment. I was trying to learn parts of my job that I didn't have previous experience. So, you know, corporate governance, executive compensation. And all of a sudden, not only did I have to do sort of the day-to-day, it was like, okay, and here's a global pandemic on top of it. So could you just go figure that out? And my hair was on fire literally most of the time. So the third thing I would just mention is, and I have no doubt that every face and name on the screen has experienced this. The days are just really long. The work days are really long. It's very hard to step away from work. And I miss the social aspect, the camaraderie. The good parts of COVID, it forced me, I assumed the dubious honor of being our COVID commander for the company and sort of managing through the pandemic, which actually helped me learn the business and our industry much, much faster, I think, than I would have otherwise. And then my husband and I both commute. So we live in West Michigan. My husband works in Columbus, Ohio, and I work in Holland, which is about an hour and 10 minutes from our house. So suddenly we were just talking last night about this time last year, we were like, oh, we might be able to work from home until after July 4th, because typically we don't see each other during the week. So, you know, having dinner was an absolute luxury Monday through Thursday. And now the good news is we like each other. So that's good. We've confirmed that. And it's allowed us to be together 24/7, which is pretty amazing. So some goods and some bads.
Thanks, Jackie. And Stacy.
Yeah, I think really early on, I kind of reframed working from home as homing from work. And I actually found, for as much as I used to complain about things like commutes, I missed that compartmentalization in my day and the drive time where I could either listen to a podcast or listen to my Taylor Swift music or just have time to think and be alone inside my own brain, as opposed to, I think one of the challenges is I don't know how, and especially as women who are just, it's in our DNA to be multitaskers. We have found a new level of multitasking, which is almost untenable in terms of just sustainability, because I can be on an important pitch and still be answering texts and a Zoom chat and maybe an email if I'm off screen. So I'm doing kind of 4 things at once. We're in kind of what I call the before times. My computer was away, my laptop was, put away, and my phone was away, and I was just focused in that moment. So I found challenge for me is how I can do really strong kind of generative thinking when I'm pulled in so many directions. But I think on the plus side, much like a lot of people here, not having the travel, not being away from my house so much. I've got 3 older kids, and for anyone that has a driver's license in your house, you never see them after the age of 16. And to be able to have family meals, and even 2 of my older girls who are in college, to be able to now drink with them has been like this joy of like this forced family time that I would have never imagined I would have, once they'd reached a certain age. So that's been a nice plus.
Thanks, everybody. Thank you all so much. I wanted to dive into something that's at the heart of this organization. As we were developing this organization, we realized that women, of course, are impacted in terms of their employment more because of the pandemic. And you all have reached a level of success, despite the fact that there are still disparities, right? There's still gender gap. I wanted to ask Heather, if you could speak to how for you that journey unfolded. How did you reach your level of success despite maybe some of the challenges?
Yeah. As I reflect on it, I don't think I realized the gap when I first got into my career. Like, I was just so excited for the opportunities. And so without understanding that gap, I just had to lean on my own skill set and my approach to do it. And I would tell you there were like 4 things. The first thing is I said yes to everything, like anything that was asked. If they needed someone to click the presentation in the room during a sales pitch, I said yes. If they needed somebody to help bind those presentations, I just was willing to do anything. And there was this great moment within the first year of my career when I was at the LASIK Group, an ad agency. Started as early in my career, right after college, and I walked by the head of business development's office, and she said, "Hey, Heather, we're looking at opening an office in Australia. Do you want to come and do it with me?" And I just said, yes. I said, I'd love to. I think that sounds fantastic. I had no idea. I didn't know where we were going in Australia. I didn't know what this was going to be about. And that really propelled me forward. And 6 months later, the 2 of us moved to Sydney. We had one 90-day contract with the Commonwealth Bank of Australia, and our goal was just to stay. And so we worked so hard and ended up becoming their agency of record. And I spent 4 years there. But it really was that just willingness. I think the other thing is I just had a lot of curiosity. I was really comfortable in getting into the unknown and just trying to figure it out. And so with that and a strong work ethic, and then just building solid relationships, I think using those types of tools, I still say yes to a ton. I still have that curiosity. I'm always willing to go into the unknown and often be vulnerable there. I think that's what's helped me just propel forward. It wasn't about the title. It was more about the challenge that I was going to have in front of me and how I could take advantage of that.
Wow, that was really powerful. I feel like there was so much in there. And especially the idea of saying yes to everything, because I think sometimes the conventional wisdom is to set your boundaries and say no to a lot of things. But you're saying that saying yes proved your work ethic, but also you jumped into some really big challenges by doing that. That really helped you grow. Wow, that's amazing. You also mentioned the idea of the building relationships, and that, of course, is key to why we started this organization. And that's the next question I wanted to address, this idea of what has been the importance of building a network for each one of you. And I want to start with Molly this time. talk about why building a network has been valuable for you.
Yeah, I'm an extrovert by nature. So it's, I'm a connector. I love to make my own connections and connect other people. But I would say there was a time in my career that, was incredibly busy, kind of 6, 7, 8 years ago, when I found myself becoming much more insular. I was at a very large company and my network became kind of all within the walls. And all of a sudden, when I got to that point of thinking about it's maybe time to do something else, I realized I hadn't picked up my head and invested in my network. And so, I've even found during COVID, like, we've all done the Zoom calls at 5:30 with a glass of wine and we're all kind of over it. But at the same time, like that's been a huge motivator for me to make sure that, those connections are continuing, whether they are social, professional, or both. What impact has it been? The last 2 jobs I've had, I didn't apply for. They came to me because they were people I'd known, connected with, or worked with previously in my career. And some of that is inherent to where we are in our career, but I think it's also, it's those connections that people that fostering and investing in will take you further. So I'm a big believer in like, you have to build out the time in your day and your week and your month. Your network is as important as anything.
Wow, that's really great. What about you, Stacy? I know this was one you were willing to answer.
It's a great question. And I loved how you phrased it about, strong networks, not large networks. About 10 years ago, a friend of mine who I consider in my network had sent me an article from Fast Company that I reference many times and I've sent to many people I've met with. And it puts into perspective the benefits of strong networks versus large. And basically it gets you to stop and think, if we were all to kind of go on LinkedIn right now and see how many people we're connected to, or how many friends we have on Facebook or Instagram, the numbers would be in the hundreds and the thousands. But if you were to show up at the pearly gates of career heaven someday, and you were meeting those people in career heaven that truly had an impact on your career, whether through mentorship, through coaching, through just a colleague who kind of shared experiences with you, that number for us might be, at least for me, when I do that exercise, that number of people I meet in career heaven is probably less than 20. So like the important thing for me has been, how do I find those individuals and then nurture those relationships? I love seeing, as I was clicking through the gallery here, a woman I worked with, I don't know, Lindsay, I'm outing you a little bit because I see you in our private chats, maybe 15 years ago at Campbell Methune. And you have to kind of work on those relationships and ask someone, do you want to have coffee? And when they say, I have to travel that day, you reschedule the coffee and you keep those relationships going, because those are the people you want to stay connected to, because they're the people that like introduce you to the right person that's going to lead to a job. They'll write a reference for you. They'll coach you. They'll tell you when you're not at your best, right? They're honest enough to tell you and call you out on your weaknesses. So that's more how I framed it too, is strength of network and building and nurturing those things as opposed to necessarily size and scale.
That's awesome. And Jackie, do you want to jump in on this one too?
Sure. And I would, Stacey, I love the way you described the strong, not large. I'm embarrassed to say sometimes I go on LinkedIn and I see people's names and I'm like, I have no context whatsoever. That's pathetic. And that's on me. I would, my, I guess, insight might be that I started my career in automotive and I spent 18 years at the same company. And I think it was a mix of naivete and arrogance where I was like, I have my network. They're like my people around me. And I thought the world kind of stopped and started in my company. I thought I'd never leave. I thought, it was the best of the best. Like, it doesn't get any better. Why would I have to go outside? And eventually I left, which was great. And it's a fantastic organization, no doubt. But when you leave, you do realize just how important it is to have people, and it no doubt there's a professional aspect to it, but what I found in retrospect is it all starts bleeding into different facets of your life as well. Like someone who's a professional contact, somewhere along the line becomes a friend, becomes a mentor of sorts, et cetera. And that to me is pretty incredible and far more powerful than I gave it credit for back early in my career. And so I actually encourage, I have two older stepchildren who are in their late 20s, and my stepdaughter is in the corporate world, and I'm like, listen, if you meet someone and you connect and it clicks, write it down, like start a running list. I actually did this when I left a job recently, and I found myself not working and frankly felt like I was just alone at sea to some extent. And I just started sitting down and writing down, who are the people I know? How did I interact with them? What were those relationships like? What was that dynamic? How might I have used them to help me, or how can I help them? So you can never start too soon, first and foremost, and don't neglect it. Take the time to make sure that you're kind of nurturing that list. And again, I would just echo what Stacy said. It doesn't have to be huge. It just has to be the right people, the strong network.
Thanks, guys. It's a lot of encouragement to continue to develop those relationships as well, not to just let somebody from the past stay there. So some of those people you mentioned become mentors, and we're going to jump into this question about a lesson that you've learned from a mentor. Tina, is there something you want to share about, a lesson that stuck with you from a mentor in your life?
I have recently gotten into TikTok, much to my children's chagrin, and there was someone on there that made a funny parody that people don't leave jobs for a lot of the reasons they say. It's for leadership and lack of leadership. And I was fortunate my first job out of college to have a wonderful leader who taught me a lot about, like you said, say yes to everything, especially when you're young and you can. If I came home today, I was like, I'm moving to Australia, I might have a mutiny on my hands with my children. But at the time when you said it, Heather, absolutely. He also taught me no task is too big or too small. When you're trying to motivate people, you do it too. Nothing's beneath you. So this was managing a crazy, huge, large summer camp, which I learned summer camping is a big, big business. And we went at the start of camp and we're like, you know what, we're going to start raking leaves. We're going to start doing this. And so I think I've always carried that with me, that, nothing is too big or small, and modeling that with your team, and also erring on the side of trust. And when you make a mistake, one of the things that stuck with me was own it, think of a solution, own up to it, and move forward. So if something happened and I said, oh no, gosh, I think I was 22 and I did something where I mailed a re-enrollment, but there were no dates and fees cards. And I was so proud I got it off early. All the financials were great. And he said, did you include this? I was like, oops. And fixed it, moved forward. And he said, enough said. And so I think I've carried that with me in the next 25 years, that everyone's going to make mistakes. When you have something that comes up, own up to it, move forward. And also, role model that behavior, operate on the side of trust. And I love encouraging people. I went to an all-girls high school, so I came into college and beyond being like, I don't know if there's gender discrimination people are talking about. And I ran into a lot of, not just that, but women sort of cutting down other women, which surprised me. And that to me was something that I've always tried to, if I'm feeling annoyed, or if I'm, frustrated with someone, to reflect on, kind of what my first boss, who ironically was a man, taught me about, having respect, operating on the side of trust, and reminding people we're all on the same page, we all want the same mission. So I think link up with someone that you admire in a role when you're young, and stay in touch with them. And now 25 years later, my son is a camper, my daughter works at the camp. So, maintaining those strong relationships do pay off.
Heather, did you have a mentorship
Sure.
story to tell?
Yeah, one of my mentors came actually from camp, Tina. So there's a tennis and life camp through Gustavus Adolphus here in the Twin Cities, or in Minnesota. And there was the coach and head of the camp named Steve Wilkinson. And he was a mentor in my life. And what he said, and he put it in tennis terms, is that you do not control whether you win or lose. You only control 3 things. And if you put a ton into those 3 things, you'll influence the win or loss. And I've just taken it becomes our family mantra, and it's become within my work world. But it's all about my positive attitude and how I show up every day. Second, it's about giving full effort in everything you do. And the third is about the respect that you show yourself and others. And so I remember there was a moment during a massive change at Deluxe. I was very early in my time here, that I was at an event and I got on the phone with my kids and they were like, "How you doing, Mom?" And I'm like, "Not well." Like I was just really, uncertain about my future and what it was. And my son was 11 at the time. And he said, "Hey, Mom, how'd you do on your attitude?" And I was like, "Oh," I said, "Yeah, I left the event early, blah, blah, blah. How'd you do on your effort? How'd you do on the respect?" And I went to bed that night and I decided to show up different the next day. And I said, those are the only 3 things I can influence. I don't know if I'm going to have a job at the end of this. I don't know if I'm going to get tapped for leadership, but I do know. And so I came in the next day, I sat in the front row and I was just all in. And I just leaned into it. And I really think that was what influenced me to get to be in the role I am today. And so I just really think when we focus on that, and we will influence the outcome. When we focus too much on the outcome, we sometimes make short-sighted decisions that the other things will influence better.
Wow, Heather, this is so great. Okay, Molly, do you have one?
Yeah, it kind of stays in the athletics realm, which Stacy will appreciate because she knows I'm not athletic at all. But I had a woman that I worked with a number of years ago who would always say, "Run your own race." And I think sometimes our careers feel a little bit like scrolling through Instagram where you're like, everyone's traveling, everyone has gorgeous kids. And then you're like, no, one person did one trip and one person had to cancel a trip and one person hasn't talked in 6 months and I'm not paying attention to that. And I think we all kind of look at everything in one big bucket. And so she would always say, run your own race. I would add to that, and not many people are actually paying attention to your time. They're worried about their own time. And so I think my career, I've had ups, I've had downs, I've had intentional setbacks, and most people don't know that because it's my race. And so I think just really pausing to say, what is right for you? What is right for your career, your passions, your family? Because most people aren't thinking about you that much. And I think that's been really liberating for me.
Oh, this is so great. I'm so glad we're recording this. So we're going to dive into growth. Turn to how you keep growing as a leader. Obviously, you're all busy. And so taking time to grow, I mean, how do you make that time? And how do you grow? How about you, Stacy? Do you want to tell us a little bit about that? How do you grow as a leader?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. So much of how we grow as a leader is because we have our definitions of leadership are defined by what's been modeled before us. And for those of us that started in this business 25, 30 years ago, largely that was modeled by men. So part of that is just reframing and redefining what success looks like, and not in the kind of more linear classic sense of climbing a ladder and gaining titles and money along the way. And especially as, what I'm doing is more removed from the day-to-day tasks of, say, advertising. It's about how I, one, acknowledge kind of my own weaknesses. And part of that, it gets back to our network and having people that kind of call you out on your BS and help you unmask your flaws. Because if you're like me, like all of us have the same weaknesses, and we probably have since we were in grade school. And they just manifest themselves in different ways. And the best managers are people that even now in performance reviews can call you out on that with constructive feedback so you can address that. So I think that's part one. And part two, in terms of redefining kind of leadership, is especially now facing what we are with the pandemic. And I'm sure everyone's seen the articles about languishing in the New York Times. How do you kind of strengthen your EQ as a leader to figure out the ways we motivate and keep people in the workforce by thinking beyond just how they're doing their tasks on a day-to-day basis? So that's what I'm trying to be more mindful of as I'm kind of continuing on my leadership journey.
Yeah, that's good. And Jackie, do you have thoughts on this one?
I was actually thinking, I was going to echo some of what Heather mentioned earlier in terms of, never saying no to opportunities, even if they look random or not in line with your core responsibilities. But I actually, as I think back to the last couple of years, and I like the way Stacy mentioned, how we define leadership. It occurred to me that I have been so focused on my career, and as I get older, things don't always work the way that they did when I was younger. And so I realized I had to start making an investment in my mental health and my physical health, which I've always done to some extent, but the mental piece I had not done. And so um, again, for those, I think I might give Molly a run for her money on the extrovert piece. I love talking. I love being around people. I love, like, that's where I get my energy. And so I tried to meditate, which was kind of hilarious. I would find myself like bursting out laughing in the middle of, 10 seconds into it. But basically just really forcing myself to take, and I started at 5-minute increments and then trying to build it up from there. A mindfulness practice, and so meditation's not necessarily for me. I can't sit still that long, but maybe it's taking a walk, maybe it's intentionally taking 10 minutes and walking outside and not doing anything, sort of looking around. That's one big piece that I've been trying to, and it's very easy to let work kind of take that precious time away, so you have to be really intentional about it. But that for me is, and then the other piece I would think, just with all the social justice issues that have happened over the last year, I have found it's fascinating talking to, and I know many of you have mentioned your children. It's been fascinating talking to my stepchildren and just hearing about their experience and for their generation. And I have learned a ton from my stepdaughter, she jumps in and just learns a subject from, and so she's sharing these books with me that she's been reading, and movies, and to understand diversity, equity, and inclusion more. And so trying to, I would say, kind of make myself as well informed as possible, and not just with respect to my professional responsibilities, which obviously you need to do also, but and then the last point I would just mention, Stacy, the EQ point is so spot on. And I think people are finally realizing the importance of EQ and being a good leader. And it's not being the brilliant jerk, I think is the phrase that's used. You don't have to be the brilliant jerk. So that's something that I try to keep in mind anyway.
And we are going to talk a little bit about vulnerability. I think that'll be a really great question to get into a little later on. But right now, the question for Molly actually has to do with, from your vantage point, what are the things that you might see that are lacking in up and coming leaders? Not to be negative, but what can we all grow in, and what can we become more aware of that we need to work on moving forward?
Yeah, I think part of it pegs to, what Heather talked about earlier. People can become so focused on the what's next and the where am I going, that they lose it's kind of like a child, they lose their spark of wonder and their curiosity. And, so I was like, for me, a big thing is when I interview people, if we get to the end of the interview and I say, what questions do you have? What can I tell you? And they're like, I'm good. It's not going to happen. I'm not going to hire you, period. You have to be curious. And I think with drive, sometimes curiosity fades. And so, I encourage people to, continue to find what sparks them, what makes them interested, what do they want to learn, and not lose that.
That's positive. And that relates a little bit to motivation. And Stacy, you talked about that when you were talking a little bit earlier about motivating people, growing as a leader in terms of motivating people. So do you want to flesh that out a little bit more? How do you motivate people? What have you learned about actually motivating people, and whether they are curious or not? You have to, work with that, right?
Yeah, and I think it's hard too, just with everything being done virtually, because so much of what, at least in the past, I've relied on is the meetings between the meetings to sense where someone's at, because I feel sometimes people are more vulnerable and honest in those unplanned moments. So you have to be really purposeful about those conversations. But just really quickly, like, one thing I've learned is I have always this fear as a leader that I'm supposed to always put up the good front, be the optimistic one. You use the word grace a lot, and all the things. And I had a really interesting meeting with my senior leadership team last week. And we were talking about just what everyone on this panel has said about the push and pull of enjoying our flexibility of working from home, but also feeling pulled in multiple directions, working longer hours. And we just had a moment where we spent that hour, we kind of threw out the agenda and we talked about how we were honestly feeling. And by the end, we didn't solve any problems. We didn't figure out the processes that would make our meetings more productive or make us work less, but by acknowledging it and being honest and candid enough, everyone felt like, to a person, just at least like they weren't as alone in their feelings. So part of that is just trying to be able to reconstruct meetings to make sure you're still a positive leader, but that you're opening kind of the door to candid, kind of vulnerable conversations.
Yeah, and that maybe gets to the heart of why somebody might not feel motivated, that they might not be expressing, they might not be as open about that. Tina, did you have any thoughts on this concept of motivation?
Very interesting question. And there's so many different work styles and preferences in employees that I think I've learned to kind of be a mirror and try to reflect where someone is, what they're thinking, to figure out what motivates them. And I've had to have some hard conversations. Who was talking? I think it was Jackie earlier. Said she was with her first job for 18 years, and I was at a job for 15 years. And I remember towards the end, I probably should have left a few years before I did. But I was, I was comfortable, I was happy, I was moving up the ladder, and that was great. And somebody said, you're not a tree. If you're not happy, you can move. And that kind of stuck with me too. And so, sometimes what you want to motivate people, you want to meet them where they are. At the end of the day too, that, I look at who's the best fit for this job and what's the best job for you. And my goal, if I've ever had to coach someone out of a position, is for them to feel that it wasn't a failure, but it's okay. Trying things, you're not going to succeed if you don't get up to the plate, to use another sports analogy. And really, as I think it was Stacey saying, encouraging those honest conversations. I think there's a pressure, especially as women, to solve problems and everything's great and we're all doing fine. And sometimes it's okay to pause and say, hey, this is a really hard task. What can I do to help? Or just listening to people. And one of the things an earlier boss always said to me was that curiosity. If you don't understand a policy I'm expecting you to enforce, ask the questions. So I encourage people, if they're upset, ask me about it. At the end of the day, sometimes you may not agree, but at least you can understand. And I always as well encourage people that if they're feeling uncomfortable, they're feeling frustrated, ask questions. I will never be offended by you asking a question. And so I do like that curiosity. I like to, have those open, honest conversations. But at the end of the day, it is also up to the individual employee to dig deep. And I want them to feel comfortable coming to me if they're saying, you know what, I don't think this job is the right fit. And great, let's help find one that is. So those are my 2 cents on that.
Yeah, that's good. And Heather, how about you? How do you motivate people?
Yeah, I think one of the things I really leaned into, especially during this pandemic, was along the lines of what Molly was talking about, in grace and gratitude. Right at the start of the pandemic, my kids and I started doing a journal that was a grace and gratitude journal where every day we had to name 3. And I just found that keep my mindset in a really good place. And so as I'm helping people with those obstacles, sometimes we just attack and we don't have grace to what's going on with that other person. And so I've really tried to help people sort of open their mind to that. Let's find the obstacles and the ways to solve them. The second thing I've done is just invested a lot more time from a human side, from the EQ side. And so across my team, every month I have a coffee chat with only 5 individuals. And the coffee chat is just to get to know each other. And I try to act that out and show, the vulnerability that I have and the areas that I'm concerned about. But I found as I invest in the community and take that time out, that's just helped motivate the overall team that if I'm willing to do that, shouldn't they be willing? So I've leaned into sort of that human connection to then help motivate so we can have the conversation on managing to the obstacles that are in front of them.
That's great. And I just wanted to remind everyone in this meeting to put questions in the chat. We'll probably get to some questions in about 5 or 10 minutes. So we'd love for you guys to think of some questions as you, as we go through this conversation. I do want to turn to that concept of vulnerability. We're all familiar with Brene Brown talking about how valuable that is, how essential it is. But I think sometimes as women, how do we maintain vulnerability while also maintaining a sense of authority. I don't know if that's a challenge you've had. It's something I feel like I've experienced. I'd love to hear your thoughts on vulnerability as well in your role, as well as maintaining your authority in that space. So who would like to start with that? How about Molly? Do you want to?
Yeah, I mean, I think we've kind of touched on it in a few ways because we were all, we probably come from a spectrum of how vulnerable we're willing to be publicly or at work. COVID and sitting, homing from work forced that into a totally different realm. And so, I think as we've all gone through the journey of, what the past 14, 15 months have looked like, I would say I've always been a pretty open, vulnerable leader. Jackie and I worked together at one point. She's seen me cry at work. I've cried at work other times, and that's okay.
Same, Molly.
I think I believe that you should just own who you are. And I had a boss early in my career actually tell me that I had to toughen up and that I should never cry at work. And I remember really trying hard and like suppressing. And I realized I just wasn't being me. Now I'm not going to cry every day at work, but it's okay to be human. And so I try and model that with the people I work next to and for, and who work on my team. I just think we need to be authentically ourselves. I did laugh the other day because there was, we joined a Zoom meeting, and 3 of the women who are on the executive team with me, people started messaging each other saying, "You look so pretty today. You look really nice." And I got laughing because I'm like, the men are not doing that. They're not complimenting each other's haircuts, but that's okay. That's who we are. We're coming as ourselves and embracing who we are as women too.
That's so good. Jackie, tell us.
Because I cried in front of Molly. Am I next? So actually very similar. I mentioned that I kind of grew up professionally in the automotive industry, and very different culture to other companies where I've worked. And at that point, and by the way, I mean, sort of with me is what you see is what you get. And I tend to use pretty self-deprecating humor about myself. I mean, people get to know me really fast. Either they appreciate it or they don't, as the case may be. But I remember it, and early in my career, I looked around and this is, again, my perception was the people who were successful, again, going back to that definition of what constitutes success, seemed to play more of that brilliant jerk role. And so I said to myself, that's what you're going to do. You're going to become kind of a nightmare. And I tried it for probably, I think I lasted maybe 2 weeks. And it was so counter to my DNA, to who I am, to how I show up, to, I mean, I love laughing. I try to take life not too seriously, which is a little tricky to do as a lawyer, but in any event, I literally, to the point that I went into my boss's office one day and I'm like, listen, you may have observed some behaviors over the last couple of weeks. You're not going to see those anymore. It's just not me. And like Molly said, I'm going to show up who I am, and either it's embraced or it's not embraced. And again, I think actually this is an area where, making sure that the culture of the organization that you work for is a good fit for you is really, really important. Not to say that it always has to be an ideal match, because I think, again, that helps with growth, it helps with development. I certainly have a tougher skin as a result of where I started my career, which is not a bad thing. But I will continue to show up as with my vulnerability on my sleeve. And the other thing that I would mention, Elisa, and you touched on this, is just making sure people understand that it's not a sign of weakness, and that it doesn't mean that you're going to roll over or you're going to. And there have been occasions where I've had to have a conversation, outside of a meeting to say, your response to that was not appreciated, and here's the message, and this is what we're going to do. And so you do have to kind of put the stake in the ground at times if people are perceiving that as weakness or an inability to lead or something along those lines. But man, be who you are, show up as who you are, and trust me, the opposite way is an energy depleter, and then some.
And actually, I'm connecting the dots in my own mind and thinking that takes some vulnerability to have a conversation like that. And so that's included in this concept of being able to be vulnerable, depending on your personality, right? But to be able to actually honestly say to someone, you know, this is the way things are, and we're going to address this conflict. Heather, how about you and vulnerability?
Yeah, I think there is a spectrum of it. Sometimes it's hidden, and that usually comes from fear. And I found the times that I'm willing to be vulnerable, all of a sudden are some of my greatest growth moments. And I think, Jackie, the you be you, like you can only be the best of you, and no one else can be better at that than you can. And so just having that security that you're this wonderful person to have so much to value and to give. But I found, I'll tell you, last year we were in a furlough moment where we were trying to figure out who we were going to furlough from our team. And there were some different strategies that were happening across the company. They weren't very aligned. And I felt really uncertain and really scared. Like, am I doing the right thing? And I remember at that moment reaching out to an executive that wasn't in my line because I wasn't getting what I needed from my own executive. And I reached out to him and I was tearful. I'm sort of scared. Like, am I doing the right thing? What's going to happen? How are these people going to make it? And he supported me and helped me and gave me the confidence, and I could show up and manage that messaging to my whole team. And then that afternoon, he checked in on me. And then the next morning is Saturday, and he writes to me and makes sure that I'm okay. And all of a sudden, we built this rapport that probably would have never happened if I hadn't been willing to say, I'm scared, I'm uncertain, and I really need some help. And he was a leader that I respected and thought I could get what I needed. So I think there's a willingness to appreciate those vulnerable moments and what they can be and how they can help you grow and just build relationships.
Asking for what you need, another form of vulnerability, right? We're going to turn to some book recommendations. And of course, everyone could go get Brene Brown's Dare to Lead. That would be a recommendation. But Stacy, do you have any other books? And everybody can throw some book recommendations out there at this point if you'd like.
The irony is not lost on me that I'm answering this question with an empty bookshelf behind me. But do know, and Molly knows this because we were in book club together for years, I'm a voracious reader and I'm moving. And so my husband's already packed all the books on the bookshelf. And I'm going to cheat in answering this question because I think all of us can acknowledge I work a lot and I have a hard time putting boundaries up when it comes to work. And I am just a lover of all things pop culture, movies, TV shows. Please friend me if you have recommendations because we will become besties quickly. And I read a lot. And reading for me is escape. And like Molly was talking about staying curious, for me and being in the creative industry, I don't turn to nonfiction kind of workbooks. I turn to escapism, and I'm drawn to books with strong female leads, TV shows as well. So like my recommendations are in that vein because it helps shut off my kind of work brain and turn on my kind of creative brain. So kind of recently, some of the things I've read that I just absolutely love is The Vanishing Half. Again, it's fiction. The Nightingale, which was a great one by Kristen Hanna. And then on the kind of documentary, non-kind of book front, Tina Turner, there's a new documentary on HBO for her, absolutely amazing. And then I've just started watching and adore Hacks on HBO Max. So those are my recommendations. I know that's not the answer you were looking for, but for me, that's how I keep inspired and keep the juices flowing. So
that's so helpful though too. Yeah. So Tina, did you have some?
Well, it's funny because the book I was going to talk about, I see a question in the chat about balancing home, work, life balance. And I read it in college. It really stuck with me. It's The Second Shift. And I have daughters who are 21 and 19, and I talk with them about it. And I believe it's Ariel Hochschild who wrote that. And it talks about, we have this great, empowering women, and we can have the same jobs and we could do it all. And, we're still the ones until science figures out another way, having the babies and having to, to play that role as well. And, I think a culture is a big thing in a company. Look for a culture that's supportive, and don't be afraid to ask and never apologize for it. And it's also okay to want work goals. I remember when my second child was born, there's no one solution. I've done it all. I wasn't working when my first child was born. I was working with the second and third. I took a leave of absence for a year to be home. I didn't like being home. And that was okay too. You know, I still had to find what that work-life balance was for me. And I say, trust your gut. I loved reading that book because it made me feel like I wasn't alone. And it was a book written, gosh, in the 80s, maybe even the 70s. And unfortunately, not as lot has changed. And I think with the COVID pandemic too, you know, I'm working from home right now, and I'm still doing 90% of driving kids to practice, picking them up and doing this. And somehow, you know, it seems since I'm home and their dad is a principal, that my job is way more flexible and easier to do all that. So it's struggles that I think the pandemic is still kind of making it a challenge for us, as I have a child wrestling a dog in front of me. You know, there isn't that separation of the home life. But I think the more you reach out to each other and know that you're not alone, and as far as what is the best practice or tips for motherhood, it's what works for you. I have a woman right now on maternity leave, and that's the advice I gave her. You know, you may find you love it and you want to stay home, and that means different things for your career. You may find you want to go back to work, and that doesn't mean you're a bad mother. And I try not to judge people. And I think that's the most important lesson I've learned over the past decades of working is what Molly said, run your own race. Nobody's looking. And don't judge your insides from other people's outsides. I say this to my kids all the time. Facebook, fake book, woohoo, they're having a wonderful time. You know, don't compare that to how you're feeling, because nobody knows what it feels like to be you. And so I think trust your gut, run your own race, and there isn't a one size fits all approach. And don't be afraid to admit, like when I stayed home and I was like, this isn't working for me. I had a female, she was a provost of Syracuse University, say, I can't believe you're allowed to say that. I wouldn't have been allowed to say I wanted to go home from work when I had my kids. And I thought that was so interesting. So good luck. It does get easier in some ways.
And that answers the question a little bit, which is the next one, which is just to sum it up, what's some advice and encouragement that you have for women, given unique challenges that we face? I don't know if you have anything else to add to that, Tina.
You know, I mean, there again, I've chosen a very different career path when all my college friends were getting these great, wonderful jobs at these big corporations. I got a full-time job at a summer camp, and my family joked, are you going to be a camp counselor forever? And I was like, maybe. And it's led me on this wonky, wonderful journey of nonprofit leadership that I never would have anticipated. So, you know, where my partner, he's very good at making money. I'm like, I'm very good at making other things happen, like wishes for children. And so whatever success is for you could be something very different. It doesn't always have to come with a corner office and a title. And you'll be much happier in the long run if you find what is a fit for you, because there are so many blurred lines between work and home with the internet. And I joke with my kids, I'm like, do you know what an encyclopedia is? Like when you went home, you were home, nobody was calling you. And now we're expected to be connected to our kids, to our work, to our spouses 24/7. So, you know, hang in there. Don't worry if your path is a squirrely one. There's no right answer. And success means more than a title or a salary.
Heather, do you have anything for that? And then we're going to go into questions. The last few minutes.
Tina, I will tell you some of the greatest growth I've had over the last couple of years is my leadership in nonprofit. And Molly and I have connected. I actually serve as the scoutmaster for a girl BSA troop. My daughter wanted to start her own troop when that became available. And I've been leading that for the last 2.5 years. And I have 14 girls, started with 5. And it has been humbling, and I've learned so much, but it is so inspiring for me to get to like teach this next generation of leaders coming up and applying the things that I have. So I don't ever underestimate what happens outside the work and how you can grow as a leader and a person and be motivated and inspired beyond that. I just think that's really important. And the other thing is, just as a woman, you know, for my COVID experience, my kids were virtual. And to help their well-being and to manage all that we had, we literally used our dining room table as school and work. And I spent the entire time with my daughter next to me and my son across from me, all of us on our headsets doing work in school. And I just, I think people just accepted it. Yes, you heard the noises and the laughter and the Zoom calls that were happening, but you're going to hear that if we're in an open workspace and I'm next to somebody else. And I think having the courage to allow that melding of those lives so that I can meet the needs of my children and meet the needs of my career ended up just being sort of a good role model to others as they were trying to navigate that path. And I don't think I would have had the courage pre-pandemic to ever have a dining room table full of kids and me working. And there were moments that our CEO would be on and I'd be like, kids, I need you to be quiet. Like, give me 5 minutes, but it just made me human, and it was what worked. So I think about your personal life and how you get fulfilled, and it crosses over to the professional, and just can be really powerful.
Thank you all. And we did, have to say bye to Jackie at the end of the hour, but I'm going to turn it over to Gretchen at this point so that she can address some of the questions that people have put in the chat for the last couple minutes here.
Yeah, it looks like we have 2 questions. I think we kind of touched on one of them, but if anybody wants to add, Brianna wants to know, can you share any tips or best practices for managing the early years of motherhood during periods of career growth and change?
I can jump in there. We had an interesting conversation amongst some female peers the other day about guilt and mom guilt. And it was this interesting journey where we all kind of got to this confessional moment. Now, granted, most of us have older kids, but that we don't feel guilt. And I think the big shift was I did early in my career. I was that desperately like, I don't want to get the $15 fine and the guilty stares when I'm late for daycare. You were constantly feeling you were shortchanging someone. And when your kids are younger, you are. But I think getting to that place of accepting the lack of balance, whatever your world balance is really liberating. And it was, like I said, just kind of fascinating to realize we'd all gotten to this point where we're like, it is what it is. It's a beautiful mess sometimes, but I don't feel guilty about it. And so that I would encourage you to find a way to, to get to that place where you don't feel the guilt and are okay with not feeling it.
That's beautiful. Anyone else?
I would just say be okay asking for help. I always felt, I don't know if it's because I thought it was a sign of weakness or I was just too embarrassed to ask, but if someone had a soccer practice at 5 and I had a meeting that went till 5, I always felt bad asking another parent for carpool help. And now I look back on that and I think, well, that's dumb. And I would have wished someone would have asked me. So whether it's, for years I fought like hiring a cleaning person because I thought this is what I'm supposed to do. I shouldn't have to hire someone for this. I am over having to justify the shortcuts I take in my life, whether that means, Grubhub tonight instead of cooking a dinner, or the beds go unmade, whatever. You've got to find the system and don't hold yourself to an unrealistic level of perfection.
Yes, I absolutely agree with that. You got to pick the things that are not priorities so you can focus on the things that are for sure. Let's see, we have from Renee, she said, for those of you that have changed jobs at the beginning of the pandemic or have joined as a leader in a 100% remote org, what advice would you give the you of February 2020 with regard to joining an org when everyone is remote to help you more effectively find your place in your new org? This is more about just being remote, not about other things that came with the pandemic. She added.
Well, okay, I did it. So I think forcing time for the organic moments. And, my kids, I think they think my job is to be on calls. And so really making sure that there are those moments that aren't Zoom calls, that you are pausing and having just an intentional social conversation, and forcing time in the day for self-care too. I think, we can easily go 10 hours a day on back-to-back video calls. I also would have told myself sooner to turn off the self view on your camera. That is emotionally exhausting. And once you stop looking at yourself all day, it's like you're a much healthier person. So if you haven't done that, I totally would do that.
I would add one more thing. I do a lot of walking meetings. If it's an hour that I don't need to be on it, I can put in a headset and people can manage some of the outdoor noise. So that's a way that I've sort of added in a little bit of physical along with the workday.
That's awesome. And then we have one other question from Mel. She says, how do you stand out on your cover letter? Now that most companies require them, it may not even look at your resume if they aren't sold on your cover letter.
That is such a great question. And I was just talking to someone about this because my daughter had to work on a cover letter. And my advice to her was don't be afraid to show a little bit of your personal side in that cover letter. I'm so used to seeing here's why I'm qualified and listing all the traits. And I have hired so many people just based on the cover letter itself. I remember someone sharing something interesting that they spoke 5 languages. And I'm like, this person must have a drive and a curiosity and I need to have a meeting with them. Someone else talked about a side hustle they did to me that showed some entrepreneurial spirit. Someone else talked about having triplets. And I'm like, holy crap, I need to meet that person. They must be able to multitask. So like be okay with sharing a little bit something, because that's the thing that will stand out from other candidates, as opposed to just purely relying on work skills and traits and experiences.
That's wonderful. Well, thank you, everyone. We are right just past 1 o'clock here in the Midwest, so we know you all have busy days. Thank you to our panelists and to everyone for coming. We appreciate you and your support. As always, if you would like to learn more about Women's Work in Progress, you can and find out about upcoming events, you can follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn. And for those of you that are in Minnesota, we are working on organizing an in-person event. Yay, in person. So more details on that to come, but thank you all again and have a wonderful day.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.